How and why are we conscious of ourselves and our surroundings? A lot of research into the subject has been quasi-scientific, spiritual, or metaphysical. But researchers are now searching full bore for a scientific basis for consciousness. Ted Robbins tonight tells us about one researcher following an international conference on consciousness here in Tucson.
Consciousness is defined as the state of awareness of one's existence, thoughts, feelings, and surroundings. We all take breaks from consciousness in benign ways, such as a nap, or in less benign ways, abusing drugs or alcohol. But generally, a high state of consciousness defines us as beings. Stuart Hameroff is an anesthesiologist at University Medical Center in Tucson, who is also one of the world's leading researchers into the nature of consciousness. His research and his associates is moving into an area that may eventually incorporate the physical with the metaphysical.
I think that in the next decades, quantum physics with knowledge of structure within the brain is going to take us on the verge of a reconciliation of spirituality and science that's never been experienced before, and it's going to be really amazing.
In his research, Stuart Hameroff found the physical structures that may govern our consciousness. Most people know the brain is made up of billions of neurons, nerve cells. The neurons transmit information to one another chemically and electrically across a tiny space called the synapse, shown in this drawing. That's where classical neuroscience stopped, but Stuart Hameroff looked closer. What he found within the structure of a single neuron were thousands of cells called microtubules. Looking even closer, he saw the walls of the microtubules are made up of individual proteins, and within each protein, a single electron moves back and forth. One of the ways to study consciousness is to see what the brain does when it's unconscious. When a patient is given a high enough concentration of anesthetic, the anesthetic molecule, with an A in it, binds to the electron and stops it from moving, suppressing consciousness. Remove the anesthetic and consciousness returns. Put billions of these cells into billions of neurons and you have a brain, and not just a computer with its binary on-off switches.
There are a lot of things that the brain does that appear to require much more information processing capability than the 100 billion neurons hooked up to each other. Walking into a room and recognizing a scene instantly. People have tried to simulate that on computers, and it requires near infinitely more computing processing than the number of neurons in the brain. There must be something going on at a deeper level to understand consciousness.
This is the realm of quantum physics. And though science may be able to explain how an atom works, it still cannot explain why all those working atoms give rise to thoughts, feelings, and actions, a person's sense of self.
After a baseball is built up out of atoms. It's built out of molecules. So you would think that if you knew how all the little bits behave, you should understand how the big thing behaves. But there's a sort of subtle thing in between, which is really not understood in present-day physics. How you go from the small scale to the big scale, and it's a big mystery.
Oxford University's Roger Penrose is one of the world's foremost physicists. He's studied black holes, gravitational fields, and the origins of the universe. Now he is turning his attention inward. What Penrose says is necessary to understand consciousness is a new way of thinking about it.
Present physics, the quantum level and the classical level, they don't fit properly together. You need some radical new view of what's going on. And that radical new view has to have a relevance on the way how our brains work. And it's hard to say at the moment because we don't have that view yet. We will need a major revolution in physics.
Consider something called quantum coherence. Remember those individual electrons moving back and forth? Well, what if for some reason they started moving together? We would have a thought, a feeling, an action.
When a critical degree of coherence is reached, it's like being in one state. This can explain the fact that even though we have billions of neurons, hundreds of billions of neurons, we have one mind, one self, one sense of who we are, rather than neuronal firing all throughout our brain, having competing ideas and competing senses of selves. So this binding together, which is also extended in quantum physics to things throughout the universe even, and has some implications for spirituality and interconnectedness and oneness throughout the universe, within our own brains, these aspects of quantum coherence, of this interconnectedness gives us one sense of self, of who we are.
What we don't yet know is how quantum coherence happens. Meanwhile, David Chalmers is not so sure knowing how will explain why we think and feel.
These lead to great explanations of behavioral functions, our ability to make reports of our mental states, our ability to respond to situations in the environment, and so on. What these explanations don't tell us is why all this information processing should be accompanied by a subject that experiences all this information content. And that's the really key problem of consciousness to me.
In other words, why are we doing it? Why is the mechanism of our body...
Right, why is that mechanism accompanied by an inner life, if you like? It's the inner life that's really the mysterious aspect of consciousness.
I think consciousness emerges in evolution at a critical level of complexity of organisms. I think it emerges every day as we wake up. It emerges in our patients waking up from anesthesia. It emerges in the growth of a baby or maybe even a fetus. It emerges and eventually assumes control over the organism. So it's not merely along for the ride, it's actually running the show, I believe, and most people believe, although there are others who feel the opposite. Why it's there, that's a good question.
And why study consciousness? Well, perhaps to paraphrase what Einstein said, because all science is really a search for God.
In quantum theory, we find these behind-the-scenes influences that are unseen but definitely felt, often subtle, sometimes powerful, that when we observe them often seem to be random, to have no rhyme or reason, but in other situations do seem to have a sense of laws, of purpose, of organization. And that's a pretty good explanation for God or spirituality.